Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here is your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the People in Fundraising weekly nonprofit podcast. Today is Friday, April 25th, 2025, and I'm very excited today to welcome Chris Schuler to our podcast. We've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, and Chris has a unique perspective in the nonprofit world as a venture philanthropist, venture capitalist, and I'm very excited for him to share with our audience more about what that looks like. Chris, good afternoon to you. How are you?
Good, Tim. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being a guest. I'd love for you to start off by telling our audience who you are in some detail, and then we'll get into their questions.
Sure. So thanks again for having me. It's an honor to be able to use a platform like a podcast to share what I'm all about and the things I care about. And really, at the end of the day, I describe myself as a philanthropy professional who has broken down the barriers of traditional philanthropy and headed into venture philanthropy, venture capital, investment space, all in the search for impact and greater impact, and not just the fluffy impact stuff that we talk about in philanthropy that we all do and we're told to do and our bosses ask us to do and we have to hit metrics and all that stuff. I'm talking about the real base of why we do what we do in philanthropy,
Mm,
which is impact, which is using generosity to fund that impact, but that impact actually doing something. And
yeah.
impact has become such a buzzword these days that what does it really mean? What is impact? Is it helping the bottom line, or is it actually seeing a change and a
Mhm.
difference made? And so that's what I'm in search of. I'm a husband, a son, a father, a New Yorker living in southern New England. And always on the search for a good slice of pizza. But I'm blessed to have two great kids and a family guy, and that's really is my center. That's what I'm focused on is just being me and being a dad.
That's awesome. Thank you for that introduction. And we're going to talk a little bit more detail because you have various touch points in the social impact nonprofit world as a professional, but also as a longtime volunteer with organizations, scouting enthusiast, and a brain cancer awareness advocate. So we'll touch on those interesting topics as the conversation continues. Professionally, to the first question, when we first got connected on LinkedIn, you're a venture partner at Varia Ventures, working in the space of neurotech and neuroscience, neurosurgery. So I'd love to hear how your work with Varia Ventures touches into, neuroscience, neurotechnology, and any touch points there with health issues in the philanthropic space, please.
Sure. The path that led me to where I am today has certainly been a whirlwind.
Mm,
Coming from an 18-year career in nonprofit philanthropy, private education, academic medicine, public education, healthcare, today I am where I never would have expected. If you had asked me 5 years ago, will you be working or doing anything with venture capital? I would have said this, why would I do that? I have no background in capital raising.
mm,
I've helped to raise millions of dollars over my career for a variety of missions, but never just straight up capital in the investment
mm.
space. They're two different things, but there is a common denominator among them. So I'm honored to be partnered with incredibly smart, successful venture attorneys at Varia Ventures, where we're launching an emerging venture capital fund to drive capital toward diseases like the
Mm,
one that killed my dad. Venture
mm,
capital investment is well poised to drive innovation faster, improved patient outcomes faster than we've traditionally seen. And that's what excites me about venture capital, venture philanthropy, driving dollars towards innovation, not driving dollars necessarily towards the same old, because where has the same old gotten us? And when you consider neurodegenerative diseases, the same old hasn't gotten us very far.
Okay. I'm very interested in learning your response to this. I wonder, going from, a professional nonprofit practitioner to now the venture capital space, what has been enlightening to you as part of that learning curve, and how does it make you look sort of in reflecting back on your career? And you touched on it a little bit just there, the same old processes and outcomes. Um, how do you, uh, in the words of the former Harvard president, Larry Bacow, who talked about being a loving critic of institutions and practices. His phrase was actually a loving critic of our institutions. So any thoughts along those lines as you're now in a different space and maybe looking back on practices in the nonprofit world that you think, hey, we
Sure.
need to alter this?
Sure. Well, that's me. That's me. A loving critic might be a kinder way of saying it. However, I'll give you a good example. Like many of the folks who have been on your podcast, in fundraising and in development, philanthropy, whatever we want to call it, we are working to drive donors and benefactors and people, right? We're talking about people giving to do something, and that something has to become something else. How do we drive impact in the philanthropic space continuously, right? There are missions that are out there that you'd think we want to meet those missions, right?
Sure.
And that's ideally, that's what we'd say. We have a mission, we want to meet it. Now, some missions are a constant meet, right? Like you're always meeting it. In a youth development, for example,
Mm,
there's more youth, and we're constantly trying to do something, right?
yeah,
And in higher ed, you can argue that the missions are endless, right?
sure.
But in the disease space, the missions should be met. In the disease advocacy space, the missions could be met. In restorative rare cancer space, well, how do we define success and how do we define impact? And I have been blessed to have raised money in a variety of different industries within philanthropy. And I would say, as the loving critic, I would say that the $100,000, multiple $100,000 gifts that I've been able to facilitate probably could have been better spent elsewhere, which
Mm,
is a real hard thing
sure,
to acknowledge.
sure.
Um, but I'm not being paid by those other ones so I can't say that, right? I can say that. I can now say that I'm not so sure if some of those gifts were really the best use of philanthropic support. Did they feel good for the donor? Sure. Did they
Yeah,
impact the institution? Sure. Was it a good thing and morally right and an ethical gift? Absolutely.
yeah.
Um, but did it really meet the donor intention, which was to make a true difference?
Mm,
I struggle with that. I struggle with that. And I think venture philanthropy, the idea that we can invest money and capital into companies that are actually have a similar mission to the nonprofit. Some of these
yeah,
missions in these companies are we want to drive improved therapies or improve drugs faster and more effectively to save people's lives. Well,
yeah.
you have two choices. You could give to the nonprofit that say they want to do the same thing, or you could drive capital to the company that's actually going to do it.
Right, right. Yeah. Efficient and, right to the point.
I mean, it's there and there's an opportunity. And I don't want to make that sound like nonprofits are not deserving. Some are wonderful, and some of my favorites have active venture funds, where they are now using philanthropic dollars to drive that innovation because they see the need and the demand from donors to see an impact in the space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that answer. Um, Very intriguing. And you're the first as I mentioned before, first guest to dive into this topic. So I appreciate you shedding some light.
Cool.
It's relatively new information for me as well. How long have you worked in the VC venture philanthropy space, Chris?
I've been with this firm now for a couple of years, 2 years now, and it's not a full-time job. It's a labor of love, and it's a leap of faith
Yeah.
because I believe in what they want to do. They are co-founders. How I met them was because they are co-founders of a brain cancer biotech company that is developing a vaccine to glioblastoma, which is the type of brain cancer that my father was diagnosed with in July of 2021 and took his life in January of 2022, only 6 months later.
Oh my goodness.
They invested in this company, and the company is really very promising in the space. They're seeing incredible life extension from the patients who went through their phase 1 trial, and
Mm,
they are now in phase 2B and getting close to wrapping that up, which in the biotech space is significant. Many biotechs they get to the plate and they swing and miss.
okay.
And it's hard to get to first base. It's hard to get to second base, let
Yeah.
alone get home. And I think this company, which I'll give a shameless plug for, which is called Mimavax, is really getting close to swinging a home run.
Awesome. That's exciting. That's exciting. And
Very.
how much of your dad's experience influence the direction you have gone in your career, both, in the day to day, but, as a brain cancer awareness advocate generally?
Everything, Tim.
Yeah,
It has impacted everything. I am not the first person to experience cancer of a loved one. I'm not the first to experience loss. I'm not the first to experience grief. Um, and we all process those things differently.
sure.
We all live with those things differently. What it did for me, Tim, was in a way it was like an awakening.
Mm,
Um, the things that bothered me in life, the normal things that bug everybody, um, they don't bug me anymore.
yeah,
The idea of my own life and my own mortality uh, became like this ever-present elephant in the room with me. I
sure.
mean,
Yeah.
when my dad was diagnosed, we were faced with this is a disease he can't win, he can't fight, he won't live with. It is an incredibly devastating diagnosis. It's a
Mm,
terminal diagnosis.
yeah,
And that makes you think about everything, about life. It makes you think about your impact in the world. It makes you think about how you want to be a son and a caregiver and how I wanted to be a father.
sure.
Um, and it made me realize that life it is incredibly finite and I'm going to be here for it's like a drop in the bucket and nobody is going to even know my name in 50 years and I hope my kids have good memories of me in 50 years because that's all that will be left, right?
Sure.
And I'm 40, so that there's a misnomer in our culture that when you hit the age of 50 you're at the halfway mark. If you're at halfway at 38 if you're lucky.
Yeah,
And for
right.
my dad, it was less. And so I don't know what I have. I don't know what time I have left, but I certainly will not use that time to be a yes man. I will not use that time to face another performance review. I'm not going to use that time to spend time doing something I don't want to do or surround myself with people I don't want to be near. It because I have a different lens on the time that I have, and maybe it's morbid, who knows? I I am no longer seeking approval from anyone or anything.
Yeah,
I look inward for my own approval, and I believe I'm doing the right thing, and that's what leads me. So it's a little awkward when you talk to somebody that's in the business that might ask you a professional question like, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I don't answer that question. I can't answer that question. I don't have a right to answer that question. I don't have the knowledge to answer that question.
Sure.
God willing, I'm breathing and I'm doing what I believe is right and just.
Yes. Yeah. That was very moving. And I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing, the personal loss of your father, Donald, and how his passing has influenced you in so many dimensions. And this may be the more appropriate time than later in the conversation. So, um, since you just mentioned your father, what would you like people to know about him so that, in some form, his impact, his memory continues, please?
Sure. No, thank you for that question. And I appreciate you referencing him and reading a little bit about him and you know that means a lot. Listen, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm the most blessed son on the planet
Hmm.
to have had a father like Donald Schuler, and nobody would know his name. He was not famous. He was not an expert in any field or career. He did a real tough, dirty job. The kind of jobs you see on that old job, dirty jobs. He was a thankless, unsung hero in a public servant in a sewage treatment plant and a dirty job.
Yeah.
Um, and that uh, kn knowing that, right? Knowing that this guy he came from um, he came from a working class family.
Hmm.
He stayed working class his whole life, um, and he gave me a path to follow. He embodied kindness, compassion, love. He lived his life surrounded by love and family, friendship. He loved animals, wildlife, everything about the world around him. And as a mentor, I could ask for no better. That's why even 3 years from his passing, my grief is a tremendous lift
Hmm.
because that grief filled the void of our love. And to have a love like that, so grand, was a blessing, despite the grief that follows with it.
Sure.
That's the cost we pay for love.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe, um, in following you on LinkedIn, I appreciate how active you are on that platform. Very often, your content, your messages there reference your father, Donald,
Mhm.
and just that last phrase you mentioned about grief and love and loss. I think you often include that in your summary as well. And I think that's really healthy and beneficial in our society. I think LinkedIn used to be like strictly professional platform, and we're not posting about kids' graduations or our dogs. And it's over time evolved to be, all
Yeah,
encompassing of people's experiences. And I really appreciate the candor and the tributes that you give to your father, and just the awareness of letting other people know you've experienced tremendous loss and how it has motivated you on the other side, and how you
Mhm.
integrate loss with love and memory. And I think you do a really admirable job of doing that, Chris.
I appreciate that. I appreciate those words. It is a labor of love, and to your point, LinkedIn is it's a powerful platform, incredibly powerful platform. And when I joined the platform years ago, I posted about work, and nobody gives a damn about my work or anybody's work.
Yeah.
I'm and the content that is shared that often falls flat is just about work. And
Yeah.
geez, nobody, we all work. Some of us are lucky to work for things we love. Many of us are not. Many of us work because we want to get paid so that we can live our lives,
Yeah.
right? And so I have found that LinkedIn, when I started talking about my story and my dad, and I found it incredibly appropriate. And I don't go by the guise of the people who comment or the haters that say, this is for a different platform. This content should be. Well, guess what? Number one, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I could care what anybody thinks. And number two, all those same people who are on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram. It's the same. We're all the same people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think I'm going to share a recipe on LinkedIn tomorrow, but I will share things that we are all experiencing on the day to day. I mean, we all experience the highs, the lows, the love, grief, and the urgency that exists around the causes we care about. So you'll have guests on your podcast about emissions from hunger to climate, and those things matter, right? And so, how do we share those stories with a personal reason why they matter?
Yes,
And that's where I think there's a lot of power.
absolutely. Yeah, well said. Thank you for that. If we can jump up to that second question, please, because I really would love your perspective on this. Again, you've advocates, nonprofit volunteer leadership, worked in the space. The quote comes from the late poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou, and she once remarked, quote, "I have found that among its other benefits, giving liberates the soul of the giver," end quote. And as someone who's given a lot of time, talent, energy, funds to philanthropic support, how does this resonate with the causes you most care about, Chris?
Yeah, I appreciate this question. Yeah, it's a great quote. I hadn't heard it before.
Mm,
Um, I began my philanthropic cancer advocacy journey, I guess you could call it, not with a paycheck in mind. Okay. My North Star was found through my father's terminal brain cancer diagnosis, his journey through treatment, through grief experienced through his passing.
mm,
What started as a personal tragedy led me to explore and uncover every medical doctor, oncologist, neurosurgeon, advocate, patient, caregiver, everybody you could imagine working in the field of neurodegeneration.
mm,
Understanding the barriers to improving patient care and lending my knowledge and skills to help others share their stories, connect with the right people, right?
yeah,
To open more doors to move their work forward. That's what's liberating for me. It's keeping my North Star in view.
yeah.
It's staying mission driven uh, because that's what fuels my passion towards progress. That through philanthropy, venture capital investment, venture philanthropy, collaboration, partnership building. That's what's going to get us to a place for me where brain cancer is no longer a death sentence. It is incredibly liberating to be in that world on the day to day to share the urgency of this disease.
Mm. I appreciate your candor and the passion that you have in your response there. Thank you. You mentioned the phrase, and I as a podcast host, I typically try to key into words or phrases that the guest has expressed that can lead to a follow-up question. And in your response to that last question, you mentioned sharing stories, Chris.
Mhm.
And for the fourth question here, I think that's a nice tie-in. What stories do you hope that you are sharing, either in word or deed and action, that you hope that will inspire other people, including your own family, learning from your example of advocacy and involvement and philanthropically being invested in the causes you care about?
Mhm. Mhm. We lead by example, right? I'm fortunate to be a dad of two beautiful, intelligent, and inquisitive kids, and they are watching our every move. And as a dad yourself, you know it, right? They are
Oh,
watching. And parents out there have to recognize that our kids are watching very, very closely. Very closely. You say one bad word and they repeat it for the rest of their life, right? And you say think about that on this flip side. You say incredibly good words to
yeah,
them and the people around you, and those things they soak it in.
yeah,
My job as a father is to live my life as an example for them. Everything before kids was for me. It was my
sure.
life. Everything now is for them. Because as I said before, in 50 years, I'll be pushing daisies and no one's going to know who I was. Okay. So being just, being kind, being brave, so that in their lives they can emulate the same. They watch me as a professional, a volunteer Cub Scout leader, a volunteer servant in my local town government, uh, a good neighbor. My hope is that by witnessing my community engagement, they'll be inspired to one day give back themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a daunting responsibility. And I've even had experiences, you mentioned that, the impact of speaking positively about other people. I've had one of my daughters tell me, pretty boldly, the more times you compliment me about the same thing I do and use very similar words, the less the original compliment means. So that was an awakening for
Sure.
me.
Hmm.
Not just saying bad words or saying something in frustration, but there is also an alternate side to even having good intentions and expressing goodwill. So
Well, what a great feedback. And imagine if every VP of development heard that feedback, because
sure,
how are we talking to our donors?
yes,
Is is another giving day coming up where it's now more important than ever that you give a gift? How old is that record gonna last?
yes,
How long? It's so there's a lot of truth and a lot of wisdom in your daughter's comment there, because I think it could be true across the board.
absolutely, yes, definitely. An uncomfortable lesson, but a very healthy lesson to learn. So,
Sure.
we have about 5 minutes, Chris, and I'd love to get this last question here about your experience as a donor. What has been an experience that's been very meaningful to you, and what about it made it so, please?
Hmm. Hmm. Donors must see impact.
Hmm.
Impact is not a nicety, right? It's not like well, hopefully you'll see the reason your gift made a difference to whatever fund it is out there, right? And sometimes it's hard to show that
Yeah.
because some fundraisers are tasked with raising for an annual fund or raising for something that's not sexy or maybe not as impactful. And somehow they need to translate that, which is it's almost an impossible job. And that's probably why we see giving trends in the directions that they're going.
Yeah.
Um, Donors must see impact. All else is noise and fluff. To
Mm.
me, the world is filled with critically important causes, and many of your guests have probably represented those causes. For
Mhm.
me, when I give, I want to see that my gift is truly going to make a difference. Nope, not padding overhead, not filling a budget hole. I want my gift to matter. And that is and that is a responsibility on behalf of institutions receiving philanthropic generosity. They must show that gifts matter,
Yeah.
and they have to move the mission forward. So personally, for me, giving in support of brain cancer through my friend Lance Kawaguchi, who led an international brain cancer foundation, and in his South Pole trek, the guy is a very successful, world-renowned a nonprofit leader and businessman and former investment banker.
Mm.
He trekked to the South Pole in 2024
Mm.
to raise the alarm bell for brain cancer. And I was fortunate to be a part of play a small role in his journey in building a global collaboration and consortium of nonprofit organizations who believed in the same causes.
Mm.
And so giving to that was probably the most meaningful experience, because not only was the money used to improve patient care in support of brain cancer and clinical trial accessibility, but it also led me to join Lance in Times Square to ring the NASDAQ opening and closing bells live on TV with my family, my friends, and with so many of these nonprofit
Oh
organizations
my.
live for the world to see, because we raised the alarm bell and the urgency of brain cancer and neurodegenerative disease. So that's
Mm.
an experience I'll cherish for a lifetime.
That's remarkable. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and for your family to be there and participate must have been really meaningful.
Seeing my mom and my son on the screen outside of Times Square on the full screen, and being carried across televisions and live streams across the globe in honor of my dad, a simple working class guy who was unfortunate to be diagnosed with a real terrible disease. That was a highlight and a thrill, and it was an honor. It was incredibly humbling. You know, a lot of people, some people who do get that opportunity, it's a thrilling thing. And for us, it was thrilling, but it was also filled with emotion, and filled with determination that there is so much more work to be done.
Mm-hmm. That's very motivating. I like how you've articulated both the emotional component of that and moving, those energies and emotions into action and how it's motivating
Yeah.
as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderfully put. Thank you. Well, Chris, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really terrific interview. I've enjoyed learning about you, the professional side and the personal side, and I appreciate your candor and the critiques you've shared about the industry and what motivates you to do better and to be involved in causes very close to your heart. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to be a voice and share my perspective on the world, and certainly encourage your audience and friends to find me on LinkedIn. Let's talk about how we're going to make change for the future.
Absolutely. So when I post your interview on LinkedIn, Chris, I will tag you and say, you're open to um,
Great.
connections, following, and things like that. So thank you for that. For our audience, you'll be able to find Chris's conversation this summer across various platforms, LinkedIn, as I just mentioned, and then have a link to the YouTube portion of this conversation, as well as Spotify and Podbean for the audio only. And then thanks to my 100th guest, Luis Diaz, and his donor participation project. For his sponsorship, I have a new website, peopleinfundraising.wordifysites.com. Chris's conversation will be on there as well. And Chris, I look forward to keeping in touch and following you on LinkedIn and wish you all the best.
Likewise. Thanks so much, Tim.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.